Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 129 of the Best Games Period. Sadly, this week, we have no Naomi Lugo. She is currently moving across the United States to be in Colorado. So this week, it's just me, your host, Jack Gardner, and I decided to bring on the wonderful and esteemed and highly respected Kazuma Hashimoto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's really great being here.
Gosh, you've been on several of our episodes, haven't you?
Yeah, I was on the Resident Evil 4 one, and the one we talked about Catherine.
Yeah, that was a good episode. That's one of my all-time favorites, actually.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, you're so smart. You elevate my normal dithering to sound respectable.
Thank you. I don't know what to say, but you are also a very incredible host, and you lead conversations really well, so it's really nice to be on the show with you. So I really appreciate that. Don't drag yourself down too much. You're good too, okay?
Well, now I'm glad that I don't have my camera working because I'm like pshawing and blushing all over the place. Anyway, thank you very much. Before we dive into our subject for the week, which is Resident Evil, the original, which I'm pretty stoked to talk about, I just wanted to, are you playing anything interesting that you want to talk about? Do you have any topics on your mind?
I mean, like, anyone who's following me on Twitter knows that I just got through Red Dead Redemption 2, and I'm still, really on it. So that's, about it. I did play Resident Evil, yesterday. I did, a full run, to refresh myself and take some notes and stuff. But
okay,
other than that, I've really just been, yeah.
You really know your Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a run yesterday. I think I did in 3 hours.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah. So... yeah.
What are some of your non-spoilery thoughts about Red Dead Redemption 2? I know that's kind of... I think that's going to be one of those games that takes people a long time to digest. We aren't going to start seeing, the fully formed takes about it until, later this year.
So, my non-spoilery thoughts on Red Dead is that I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably one of the best westerns of all time. Because how it blends 3 of the 7 quintessential Western genres together. It's your revenge story, your outlaw story, and your rancher story, all in one as you progress through the game. And I don't know, it's a really amazing game that definitely got overshadowed by the controversy surrounding it because it's such an interesting narrative that talks about what it means to be born in violence or to be put in a violent situation and to further perpetuate these cycles of violence when you're in contact with, for example, a figure of authority that is manipulating you and using you for their own means, or being in a manipulative relationship with your parents. It's a really, really interesting story and narrative that kind of focuses around this. I haven't really seen that being talked about yet, but that's definitely what I gleaned from the main relationships in the game. And also about inheritance of vengeance, or inheritance of this, again, cycle of violence or grief and whatnot, or trauma. And it's such a good story. I really was again, I played Red Dead 1. I really loved Red Dead 1. I didn't think it could get any better. And when I saw the first Red Dead Redemption 2 trailer, sorry, I trip over myself when I say this name. It's a tongue twister for me. I was really I'm not going to like the main character. He looks like an asshole. They gave him a black hat, so he's probably going to be a bastard because that's the stereotype within Westerns. He has the black hat, and his face is big, and he's big and gruff, but no, I love this character so much. He's such a sensitive soul.
Who just wants to help and a beefy boy.
Yeah, that's my husband now, okay? He's my husband. So yeah, I think Red Dead's genuinely a really good game if you like those kinds of stories, because it is at its heart deeply cynical in the way it approaches this whole group of people that have been born into this weird crossroad of lawlessness in an era in which the government is now trying to like push this out and change an entire way of living that had only been present for like 50 or 60 years and is now going to be completely changed and just dissolved. Like it's such an interesting like look at it, I think.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I always find it really interesting because Rockstar has basically built their entire brand around this cynicism, which like it's in all of their games, and it's such a unique trait, like the not overbearing, but just like overwhelming cynicism of all of it is somewhat off-putting to me just in general, but I think that mixes very, very well with a lot of the things that they have made, especially when it comes to like westerns, because westerns mixed with cynicism is always like a pretty good mixture, I think.
Well, yeah, unless if you're like watching like a Ronald Reagan like B spaghetti western or Paint Your Wagon Red, it's usually going to end in like some sort of violent conflict and like it's really cynical. I will say this, if you haven't played Red Dead 1, for anyone that hasn't played Red Dead 1, Red Dead Redemption 2 will actually end on a very positive, happy note for you until you play Red Dead Redemption 1.
So would you suggest, because this is always the question that comes up with prequels, right? Do you, in retrospect, do you suggest that someone plays Red Dead Redemption 1 first? Or do you think that they should play the prequel first and then play Red Dead Redemption 1?
So this is like the question I get on Twitter a lot in relation to the Yakuza series. It's like, do I play Yakuza 0 or Yakuza Kiwami? And like, it's like the same conversation with Red Dead 1 and Red Dead 2. So like, if you played Red Dead 1 first, because I actually played that game on launch when it came out, and this was only because I was working at GameStop at the time, and everyone was like talking about how good it was, so I tried it out. I was like, I don't like Rockstar, but I guess the cowboy game. That really shaped my opinion of one central character in Red Dead 2, John Marston. And now that I've played Red Dead Redemption 2, I have to like parse how I feel about this character because everything I learned about him is so different that if I had played Red Dead 2, I would view John very differently and like all of the choices he's made in relation to like how he's interacted with Arthur Morgan, who's the protagonist of Red Dead 2, and like all the shit they went through, like everything that they had gone through together. And like, you could honestly start with either, but just know that if you start with one, it will fundamentally affect how you view characters in 2. And like, you will have this sense of foreboding the entire time as it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Oh, there's something really appealing about that kind of hopeless, tragic element in a lot of Western narrative that really tends to, for some reason I want to say vibrate, but that's really not the right word that I'm looking for.
Resonates?
Resonate. Thank you.
Yes.
I was wondering why I had the word vibrate in my mind.
I mean, they seem somewhat similar, so I can't blame you for like making the connection between those two words.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's really cool. For me, I've been working on outlining a YouTube video that I've been wanting to make for a really long time about Shadow of the Colossus.
Ooh.
And specifically, like, I'm not going to go into like all of the details, but I have this basically an analysis slash I don't even really know what I would call it. It's not really a textbook, but there's a whole series of personal essays about video games from a variety of different authors that are released through Boss Fight Books. And one of them is about Shadow of the Colossus. It's by Nick Sutter, I think. And essentially this idea that I've had for a while is that I have played Shadow of the Colossus like yearly since it came out, or at least since I bought it, which I think was like 2007. It came out in 2005. And so I've played this game and my views and opinions on it have changed as I have changed. And like being a trans woman now, like I have a very different experience with this game than I did than when I was like trying to be a cis man. And my idea for this video is basically putting forth like a comprehensive analysis of the game on a textual level. So like this is what the game is about. Like it's about this dude who brings a lady to this place and tries to bring her back from the dead. And then presenting all the different ways that it's been interpreted by people, or a lot of the major ways anyway. So like, for example, the marketing touted it as a romance game, which I definitely don't think it is, but it makes for good marketing. But then there are also people who bought into that analysis, and then there are people who consider it like a typical heroic narrative that just has some weird stuff at the end, you know? And I realized as I was playing through it more recently that now I kind of view it as a trans narrative, which is really interesting. And so basically this video would be about all of these different ways that one can read this text, and then putting forth my, like this way that I view it now, which I think I haven't really heard anyone else saying that Shadow of the Colossus could be read as a trans text. And so I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a very different way to interpret it. That would have never crossed my mind, but I think if I wanted to approach the story that way, I could definitely see it that way. So I'm going to try and play it now, with this in mind, and view it this way, because I'm actually very interested to see your video about this now, because there are so many different ways that you can interpret different narratives, especially one that has a story as loose as Shadow of the Colossus. So I'm really eager to see how your feelings about this game has changed as your experience as an individual has changed as well.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I don't want to go into make this a whole thing, but I just had an epiphany one day while I was thinking about it, because it's one of those games that just kind of sticks in my brain. And I realized that you can read how the main character Wander becomes more and more corrupted as someone dealing with dysphoria, and
okay,
and eventually it gets down to a point where you either have to change or die, and the end result is and I'm reading this specifically as kind of Wander being a trans woman, because Wander essentially dies and gets reborn, and brings this woman who was previously dead to life. And I think I have to work on it a little bit to make it flow a little bit better than how I just described it. But
I mean, the way you described it, I can actually really see it, so that's a really good start. Using corruption as an analogy for body dysphoria and everything, and gender dysphoria, that's actually really good. I really want to, when this comes out, please hit to me, because I really want to watch this. Thank you.
And it also works because the corruption manifests itself physically on Wander's body, so it I don't know, I have been working on an outline, and I need to fully flesh it out so that I can kind of articulate myself more clearly. But yeah, so that's kind of been my video game thing that I've been working on. So moving on, I guess.
Let's talk about survival horror, baby.
Heck yeah. So Resident Evil, it's a game. What do you think about it?
Okay, anyone that has heard me on this podcast before knows that I love Resident Evil. I was even doing Resident Evil lore streams for a while, because my friend was watching the Resident Evil live action movies and was like, "Who's this guy?" And it's this picture of the live action actor of Wesker, and I was like, no, I'm gonna play through the entire Resident Evil series for you and read every document and tell you about every minor tidbit about all the characters. so you like have a better experience with the series I love.
Did you save those anywhere? Because that sounds great.
No, they got deleted, but I'm gonna be doing it in because I have like a a Twitch community Discord now, and everyone wants me to play through all the Resident Evil games again.
Heck yeah.
Because I when I was playing Remake again yesterday, I went on like this like half-hour tangent about the game, and they were like, no, this is good, keep going. And I was like, cool, if you guys want me to like do a playthrough of like 0 to 6, just let me know and I'll do it. And now they're voting for it over Dragon Age, so I'm gonna be doing this again.
Why, out of curiosity, why 0 to 6 and not 0 to 7?
I don't like Resident Evil 7.
Really?
Yeah, I don't like it at all.
I thought people generally like that one.
I think it's an interesting concept, but to me, it's not a Resident Evil game.
Ooh.
Resident Evil 6 to me is more of a Resident Evil game than Resident Evil 7. I'm gonna get a lot of shit for that, but you know what? At least it's consistent with the tone they were building from Code Veronica, like X onward, and the characters are the same. So I'll give it that. I think the concept of having a virus that is mold-based and mold-borne is really cool, but if you really just cut all the Resident Evil things away from Resident Evil 7, it's really just fear. You're really just playing fear again with like a little girl with psychic powers, like making everyone hallucinate, and there's just a lot of like excessive violence and cursing. Like, cool, but that's like not why I play Resident Evil games. If I wanted to play that, I'd go play Fear, you know?
Yeah. So why do you play Resident Evil games?
Because I like the story, believe it or not.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I love the story of the Resident Evil games. For the record, Resident Evil is... Okay. So here's my history with Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I wasn't into Resident Evil until I was, like, 11 or 12. It's hard for me to place years. Again, I have, like, really bad memory. I just kind of remembered based on where I was living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But my cousins had played Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1 because my cousin had an older brother, and so he was allowed to play Resident Evil, so he'd watch and be like, this is the scariest game ever, and we would get these magazines, like, from Japan, and one of it had, like, an advertisement for Code Veronica X, and I was like, cool, why does that guy have red eyes? And so he told me about it, but I didn't remember it, and then eventually, I'm in middle school, and I go over to a friend's house, and we're all having this big sleepover, and one of them has Resident Evil for the GameCube.
Heck yeah.
And I wasn't really paying attention, but they were like, my friends were like so afraid. They could not get through halls. Like, they were too afraid of the zombies. So I was like, you know what? Give me the controller. And so I would run through the hallways with them, and they would figure out the puzzles. And all I would be doing in the meantime would be, like, on my computer in my room, playing Ragnarok Online, sometimes going through hallways for them. But eventually... Yeah! Like, I just didn't give a right?
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, like, a few weeks later, I got really sick, so I went to, like, the local supermarket, and I picked up, like, a gaming magazine that had, like, strategy guides in the back because they had codes for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game that I was playing, and I wanted to cheat because that's who I am in my heart, and I just really wanted my Blue Eyes White Dragon, okay?
Yeah,
like, let me have that. And there was a guide for Resident Evil. So I would get really bored during the week because my friends, like, went to different schools, so they had to, like, travel, like, to come hang out at my place on the weekends. So I was reading the magazine, and I just read the whole guide for Resident Evil, and I was like, no, this is actually really fucking sick. This is awesome. This is cool. So I got really into, like, the story of Resident Evil Remake, and that's, like, where I started. Later on, I ended up going to Gen Con in Anaheim,
okay.
And they had a demo there for Resident Evil 4, and I shouldn't have been playing that, okay? Like, I wasn't 18 or whatever.
Gen Con has video games?
They used to. This is how long ago that was. It was in Anaheim. It's not in Anaheim anymore. They canceled it a year after I went to that. Yeah, so this is a really long time ago. I'm old. I'm very old. And the guy was like, oh, you like Resident Evil? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, my son likes Resident Evil 2. But you know what? Like, sure, your parents not around, but do you want to try? And I was like, cool. He's like, yeah, this is Resident Evil 4. It's really different from the other Resident Evil games. And I was like, yeah, who is this guy? Who's the new protagonist? No, that's Leon. And I was like, oh my god, Leon's hot now. What the f***? like, that was like my immediate reaction. as the guy was like, "Yeah, no, go into the village and go into that house," and that triggered like the infamous Dr. Salvador cutscene, and like that was when I was like, "No, I really love this goofy shit. I really fucking love it."
Also, Leon's really hot.
Yeah, no, that was that. I was like, "What?" Like he has like really nice like eyebrows now. His hair is good. It was so good it inspired an entire generation of young men to cut their hair like that for the next 5 or 6 years.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, man, Leon was really like an icon for so many people. Um, but yeah, like that's how I got into Resident Evil, and I was like obsessed with like reading all of the in-game like notes and everything. I had even gone out of my way to find a the website for Remake when it had come out, the Japanese website. This was only in Japan. They released Wesker's reports in Remake.
Oh, okay.
Kind of detail some stuff. And Wesker then was my favorite character. He's not my favorite character now. I was a young edgelord. I don't want to talk about it. It's behind me now.
Who's your favorite character now?
Billy Cohen.
Okay.
You know, the character nobody remembers, but he has a really ugly tribal tattoo because his character was kind of like, it was designed around the idea if he's not supposed to be trustworthy. So, understandably, you're a Japanese developer and you think, he's a criminal. He should be associated with being a criminal. He should be untrustworthy. Let's give him a tattoo. What kind of tattoos do white people have? Tribal. So they gave him this ugly hell tribal tattoo, and like he's a great character, but he has a really bad tattoo. But yeah, but
he can get it covered up.
Yeah, hopefully one day we'll never see him again, but maybe one day. Yeah, they had released these Wesker's reports on the Japanese website, and I had read all of them, and I was like, wow, like no, this is super cool. Like wow, this is like some like conspiracy theory, like shit, I don't know, like I was like trying to wrap my mind around it, and it was incredible. Like I don't know, like when you really read like all of the notes and really get into all of the lore regarding like the first game, how the T-virus came to be, what they were making it for, which was actually to make like a super soldier serum for the United States government, and Umbrella was basically like they took the fall for all of that when they dissolved after Raccoon City. So it has a lot to do with like American like the American military and like being a world power.
Yeah, a lot of the like military industrial complex and ideas about colonialism and maintaining power.
Yes, it has a lot of that, and people kind of think, oh, it's like the action zombie game where Chris punches a boulder and Wesker is official now, and there's a pyrokinetic BOW lady who can like sing to ants. Like, no, like it's really a lot. Like,
I mean, all of that stuff is in there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what I like most about this series too is that relationships are never explicitly stated, so you can really just run with it however you want, and the developers just kind of like have given the fans free range to do whatever they please. For anyone that is curious about how a lot of Japanese fans feel about Chris Redfield, just look at his alternate costumes from Resident Evil 5 and the concepts from Resident Evil 6, and that will tell you how the fans feel about him, especially the male fans.
What does that mean?
He's like, for a while, he was like a gay bear, basically, is what everyone equated him to.
Okay.
So
that's why he's built like a refrigerator in 5?
Oh, no, that's actually because Albert Wesker beat the like ever-living shit out of him in Resident Evil Code Veronica X, so he hulked out because of like the PTSD from that incident. It's actually in a series of short live-action like trailers that were only available in Japan that you can know this.
Wait, are these trailers like basically his training montages?
No, it's actually him having like PTSD so bad that he can't like function as a person anymore, and he's worried Wesker is gonna kill him, so that's why he hulked out.
That's less fun.
It's not very fun. He's like, I'm stressed out and I'm working out, and it's a lot. Like that's it, you know.
One of the things that makes this series really hard for me to parse is that there's a lot of content that isn't available for Western audiences. So I'm glad you're here to kind of like tell me that this stuff exists.
They even have stage plays that are canon to the universe.
Oh, I actually wrote a story about that once.
Oh, really?
It was great. Yeah. That was a rabbit hole to go down, by the way. I didn't know that was like a whole like subgenre of adaptation that was going on.
It's a lot.
It is a
Stage
lot.
plays are wild in Japan. Like there's always like a dance break or something, and it really depends on who's producing it.
I was surprised at how much pageantry a Resident Evil stage play got. Like
Oh.
I was like, oh, this is legit.
Yeah, people take that very seriously. Like stage plays are like a high form of entertainment. It's like, ah, yes, Resident Evil is having a stage play this year. I will go to that stage play because I enjoy stage plays. Like they're very popular in Japan. There was even recently a Devil May Cry stage play that's also I think it's canon to the universe, but it's again Japan only. It has to deal with Devil May Cry 3, fills in some like lore gaps. It's a lot. Okay, just stage plays are a lot.
Is there a way to like check them out if you're not like physically present?
You can buy the like the recordings of them, but you will
Okay.
have to do so on like eBay or like Yahoo Japan or get like a middleman service because they do not ship them to they don't localize them. So no subtitles either for English. You will have to know Japanese
Well,
or
that
find a
makes it
translation.
really inaccessible.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, um, so I guess kind of going back to Resident Evil, um, the are you familiar with Sweet Home? I assume
That
you are.
yes. That's actually I had this whole list written down. I was like, Resident Evil influences Sweet Home. Mikami has spoken about this in X amount of interviews, blah 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 blah. Yeah, yeah, I know Sweet Home. Everyone knows. Anyone who likes Resident Evil like as much as I do knows Sweet Home.
Yeah. I would hazard a guess though that like a lot of people don't know what that game is
hmm
and are maybe encountering that for the first time. So do you want to like talk a little bit about what Sweet Home is and kind of like how it became Resident Evil, sort of?
So, Sweet Home is actually a survival horror role-playing game that Capcom made in 1989, and it was actually directed by Fujiwara Tokuro, who had worked on Ghosts and Goblins and everything. And it's basically like the inspiration for like the survival horror genre. Because it was like a huge inspiration for Resident Evil. I don't remember exactly why Mikami fixated on this, but basically like it's basically Resident Evil but like with like a lot of menuing, like you're in a mansion, there are zombies and there are puzzles and inventory management and you got to get out alive. Like it's sort of like the foundation for like this entire franchise.
Well, and that makes sense because like the framing of that, like setting an entire horror game in the confines of a house,
hmm
um, is really working with the limitations of the hardware of the time,
hmm
and also like a lot of those the slow door transitions in Sweet Home are really useful when you're trying to get the cinematic effects that you're going for in um like Resident Evil, right? Like it's
hmm
useful for hiding all of those loading screens.
Yeah, it's a very clever way to disguise that you're going into a different area, but it also allows them to have these beautiful pre-rendered backgrounds and character models on, for
Hmm.
example, like the GameCube way back then. Like, if you look at Resident Evil on the GameCube, it still holds up today. Like, it's still gorgeous. It still looks so good.
Yeah,
Um,
the whole pre-rendered background thing is one of the art like early like highly detailed attempts that actually like really holds up over time. Like that entire aesthetic um just looks really nice. Like I was taking screenshots, and granted I was playing on the PlayStation 4,
mhm.
but the angles and the framing of some of those shots are just absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, yes. Yeah, just, there's something to be said about, like, the fixed camera angles and, like, how they really lend themselves to the game and how, like, I don't know, just the game itself just looks beautiful. It looks like a piece of art.
Yeah, I'd
And
agree with
I don't
that.
know. It's even
I
like the small particle effects in certain hallways where like light is filtering in through a window and there's dust. Like it's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and I particularly like when games are able to frame use unique and interesting camera angles, because so often the camera is in the control of the player, which
hmm
leads to a rather static and boring uh, set of angles. And so the framing in Resident Evil, especially if you're going back to it now, is really fresh. It feels really cool and different and good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that people need to know is that it's definitely not an action game. Which, if you go in trying to treat it as an action game, you're going to be real frustrated and real disappointed.
The game actually actively, remake especially, works against you if you try and treat it as like an action game with the Crimson Heads that they introduced in that game. They're only in that game. But that basically discourages you from killing like as many enemies as possible. Like, you just do not want to kill any zombies. Because if you do, and you don't dispose of them properly, and there are limited resources in disposing zombies, you're gonna have a mansion full of Crimson Heads, and that's like the worst thing ever. Like, when I first played this as a kid, of course we didn't burn any of the zombies. We were like, okay, like, I don't see why this is important. They're dead, but why are the corpses lingering around? And then after you hit like certain triggers in the game, they get back up and they're like running around the mansion. They're like tearing you apart. You're dying. Everything's like, you go into a room and you just hear like this like low shuddering growl, and you're just filled with dread because from that fixed camera angle you can like maybe see like the claw of the Crimson Head, or maybe like it's staring at the camera and its mouth is open. It's just exhaling like this toxic fume. It's really terrifying. Like, and the game itself it frames all of this and really lends itself to like, I think like every way it's presented in terms of its music, enemy design, fixed camera angles, lighting within certain rooms, the way certain rooms even tell you a silent story if you look around and like check item placement stuff. It was very like ahead of its time regarding that. Same with Silent Hill. I feel like those are two very similar games like that.
Yeah, and I would almost describe this as more of an adventure game than I think people would typically describe a survival horror game. Because especially early on, there's a lot of downtime where like nothing happens. It's just you wandering around, and there's like the occasional zombie or the occasional dog, but you're just kind of wandering around and like trying to figure out what's going on in this weird, creepy mansion and solving puzzles, which is an adventure game. Like, it reminded me a lot of games like Seventh Guest, or I'm trying to think of the other one. It's not Friday the 13th, but it was like a adventure horror game. Oh gosh,
Clock Tower?
Not Clock Tower either. It reminded me of it's an adventure game. You're at a house. There's a bunch of different characters, and there's a killer on the loose. And you have to like figure out who the killer is, but you're basically going around this house, and people are getting murdered, and like you have to figure out kind of the story that's going on behind the scenes. There's very much that sort of an element going on in Resident Evil. I might be thinking of Maniac Mansion.
Maniac Mansion?
Yeah. It's a 1987 Lucasfilm game.
Oh.
And so the basic premise is that you're playing as this teenager, and you're trying to like rescue. There's like a meteor, and it's sentient, and there are. So the main character is named Dave, and then you can also play two of Dave's friends, and there are 6 options to choose from there. And so, yeah, depending on like which characters you choose to play, like the adventure is different. Yeah, so it's about these like 7 kids in a haunted house trying to best this killer scientist person.
Ah, yes, that is the game. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting, yeah. I miss that sort of tension and atmosphere in video games, just like where you feel a sort of pressure to complete things within like a given time, I guess, without there being like an actual timer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's just good at making that pressure feel. Yeah. Especially Resident Evil is good at this. Like, I noticed that for example, in like that first save room, there's that clock ticking. And it's just constant. And it's going at a slightly faster pace than you might like typically think. And it makes you anxious. You don't want to stay there. You want to figure out what's going on, and every time you go through that room, it's like a reminder that time is going by, and you need to hurry, because you're in this zombie mansion.
Yeah, it induces this kind of anxiety, I think, this like constant ticking of the clock, almost like a countdown to something that you aren't sure of, like what's going to come at the end. I feel like Resident Evil Remake in specific does a really good job of this, of it's not exacerbating, I think it's exemplifying like this fear of the unknown, which is a very common theme in Japanese horror games. Because Japanese horror is more fundamentally based on the fear of the unknown, not in like the same way you would think of like Lovecraft, in which it's xenophobia. It's actually like a fear of the unknown, like something you do not know. As opposed to Western horror, which is very much about like the raw brutality and like savagery of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and that kind of thing. This is more like a silent kind of violence, like a creeping fear of dread, like what's going to be around the corner? Why am I in this situation? And what is in here awaiting me?
Yeah, and also, it does that while I think that also plays into the like sensibility that is like very prevalent in a lot of horror circles of like you don't want to show the monster, you know? And so like if something's off screen, it's inherently scarier. Like you know it's coming, but you can't see it. It's scarier because your mind is filling in the gaps. And I think that again, like the fixed camera angle really plays into that really well, because often you are being chased by something and you can't get a good look at it. Which is great for horror, less great when you have to like are forced into an actual combat situation that you can't get out of without shooting that thing. So, and question, we haven't really talked about this, but do you prefer the remake over the original?
Yeah, I do prefer the remake over the original. And
Okay.
the original, it's campy and it's fun, and it's what they could do with it at the time. Like, I will never forget that, like, the live action opening, like the Chris Redfield and like he's like smoking, and like the unrated version, and Rebecca Chambers and she tightens her headband, or Albert Wesker and he's like trying to smooth back his already like hairsprayed to shit hair. Like it's really a lot. Like
I wish they had kept something like that or remade that for the remake.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
I don't think I'd be able to take any of it seriously. Like, with Resident Evil Remake, it was like, we basically reintroduced the classic Resident Evil to us, and really made it truly terrifying, because it was very serious, even with all of its weird, stilted dialogue, which is intentional, because if you look at the way this dialogue is read and written, it's very akin to, again, Japanese horror films. They're writing in the way that they know, you know, despite it being clearly in America with Western characters and protagonists and everything. Like it's framed in this very deliberate way that is extremely Japanese. But
that is a question I had for you. Why do you think that this series was made, like, not made in America, set in America?
I think it's more interesting. That's kind of the thing with, like, so native Japanese people, like, things that are Japanese for them may not be as interesting or as unknown as it would be if it was in like another country, in America, for example. So maybe that's why, that's the appeal. Like, you have like these people that maybe you don't really know in a situation you don't really understand.
Okay.
Dealing with like something that's new and unfamiliar to you. And it's also the appeal of like Leon being a white dude is like totally like something that's like, oh yeah, he's super hot because he's white. It's like one of those kinds of things, you know? Like it's really like that. Yeah.
Okay. And can you explain that a little bit more? Because I feel like a lot of people aren't maybe familiar with that element.
Oh, well, which one? Leon being hot or
Leon being hot because he's white?
Okay, so he has like it's like this idea that like there's like a completely different like view when it comes to like Westerners, right? And I guess it's not too similar to the way that like white people view like anyone of like a different race, in which it's like, oh, you have like these features that are like inherently exotic to us, therefore like you are attractive in some way. I wouldn't say it's like on the same level of that, but it's like, yes, Leon is a 6 foot tall, white, blonde American man with good skin and blue eyes. That is very desirable because we do not have any of that here. So it's very much like, yes, like this is something like very palatable to us because it's not your typical like black hair, brown eye, black eyed like Japanese man, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
so it has a little bit of that like foreign exotic flavor, I guess.
Yeah.
Flavor is not the word that I wanted to use, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. It's very much like, yes, it's the foreigner, you know, like, that kind of thing. I'm sure there's probably something about this in like an art book that I haven't read, because after Resident Evil 5, I kind of dropped off of my Resident Evil lore because I was really mad at the ending of that game.
Why is that?
I was a Wesker fan, okay? It was complicated, and I was a brat. So I spent $100 in that collector's edition, and I was so upset at the end, I was like, I'm never going to play a Resident Evil game ever again. Yeah, like I was a huge brat. I was very much like that about this game series.
So Wesker only recently stopped being your favorite character.
I was like 18 when Resident Evil 5 came out. That's like 10 years ago.
Oh gosh. No, yeah. Don't say that. Don't say that.
So like it was like I'm done with Resident Evil, and then like, you know, I met my boyfriend Jake. He was like, my favorite character is Chris. And I was like, cool, I'm glad you have bad taste. And then he eventually changed my opinion. Because like I don't think there's anything wrong with Chris. At the time, I just didn't care for characters that were kind of like Captain America. Like Chris is like this really goody two-shoes. Like I got kicked out of the Air Force because I disobeyed an order. I didn't feel like lined up with my morals, and I'm a really righteous person, and I want to help everybody and save everybody. And I'm the good guy, you know? Like, cool. I don't care about that. Like, whatever. But like as I've gotten older, you know, my tastes have changed and matured, and I have better taste now. So, you know. Yeah, like it was just like that. So yeah, like it wasn't recently. It was like I think when Resident Evil 6 came out, because Jake and I actually met playing Resident Evil 6.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we met playing RE6. It was literally him DMing me on Tumblr being like, "Hey, do you want to play RE6?" And I was like, "Who do you play? Because I can't play Chris because I can't see her on his shoulders. If you play Chris, we're friends now." Like that kind of thing in the co-op campaign.
Nerd.
Yeah, it's complicated, okay? Like, when a character's shoulders are so big I can't aim around them, like, that's a problem for me, you know?
Yeah, it sounds like a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just get used to it, but, like, I can't. I'll never play Chris Redfield, ever.
Okay, so how do you feel about, How do you feel about the inventory space?
I love it.
Okay.
Love it. I don't know. I really like this item management system, and like in RE4, like that's when people got really into it, when they were like, look at my like really well like managed inventory slots and everything. I have like all my health items lined up here, but like with Resident Evil 1, I love that added challenge of like, oh, I need to make sure like I have enough ammunition and have like my keys and everything, but also enough space to pick up anything I might find that could be useful to me. And Jill has more inventory slots than Chris. So if you're playing Jill, like you have like that two slot advantage, and if you're Chris, like, well, I mean you're Chris, right? So like I guess you have to go around the mansion more if you don't know where everything is, if you haven't memorized the items you need at the time. And I feel like
Chris.
that adds to like an extra layer of it like being really scary, like, oh no, I don't have this item. I need to go all the way back across the mansion to the item box, but there are like 7 zombies on the way there, and I'm on caution. If I get bitten again, I'll be on danger, and I'm so stressed out right now, like it causes you to really like reassess and reevaluate the situation, add more tension through this like gameplay mechanic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. At the same time, I will say that if you don't know what you're doing in this game, like if you don't have a walkthrough for Resident Evil, you are amazing at video games because this game would be incredibly hard without a walkthrough.
You think
Like
so?
I think if you had no idea what you were doing, you would fill up that house with not liquors. Gosh, Crimson Heads. You would fill that house up with Crimson Heads. You would have to take on the plant boss, like, without poisoning it.
Oh,
Like,
Chris has to do that, by the way. Chris
oh
is
yeah,
not
yep.
yeah, he's like a visual, so Chris is just like extra hard mode if you like a challenge.
You would probably end up with Richard dying.
So
And
you
not
don't get
helping
the
you,
shotgun.
and,
Yeah.
and not helping you with the snake, and like there are just all these little things that I feel like it would be really rewarding to play it without a walkthrough if you discovered those things, but also it would be so difficult. Um, I was playing through some of it, and like if you want to save, you need the save ribbon, and like that's again, like there are just all these little elements where if you aren't paying attention to your inventory space, you can get completely screwed over. Um, and especially if you don't have access to that first item box yet. I actually had to restart my game because I had filled up my inventory with things that I couldn't like get rid of, which was frustrating. But it's it would be difficult, and especially if like you're not paying attention and not solving a lot of the unnecessary puzzles to get like the extra ammo and the like the special guns and all of that stuff.
Getting the mag, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I respect this game a lot, because it's not interested in, I guess you have to rise to meet it rather than it kind of meeting you. And at the same time, going back to our initial conversation, I feel like it's pretty accessible.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like Resident Evil, in terms of its difficulty, is actually more around the puzzles and things like item management and understanding like when you can save, as opposed to like having too many like saves, or even like managing your own anxiety around the game, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Like, as opposed to it just being punishing. I never had an instance in a Resident Evil game in which I was like, actually like, this is unfair, I can't beat this. Unless you're talking about Code Veronica X, that game just sucks when it comes to difficulty. That's actually just really hard. That's actually the hardest Resident Evil game out there, by the way. Code Veronica, it's so hard.
I do have to say, the initial death trap with the key, I mean, it does telegraph pretty well that it's a death trap, but if you take the key thinking that you're going to get out of it, you can't. You're just dead. If you didn't save, that's too bad. Which I found pretty funny. Luckily, it's pretty close to the opening of the game, so you're only set back like a few minutes. But
you can also put the key back, by the way.
Oh, you can. Look at it again. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you look at it again as the statue's coming towards you, you can put the key back.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And that's another thing I like. There's a lot of depth to... There's a lot more depth than you might expect from a PlayStation 1 era game that has been, it has been adapted for modern technology, but still,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that old school design sensibility is very much still there.
Yeah, I just think like I feel like even though like that old design sensibility can be very difficult for people to kind of readjust to given how games are now, I don't feel as though it's an impossible game to beat on
Oh,
its easiest difficulty, if you know what I mean.
yeah, definitely not.
Hmm.
It's just I think that there is definitely an adjustment period that people have to go through.
Oh yeah, because this game does require you to do a lot of reading, and that's something I've noticed this so much. As I've gotten older, a lot of video games don't really require me to read anymore or use my brain as much as like I used to when I would play games. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, I'll go to marker A on my map, go to marker B, whatever. Even if I turn this on, like in Reddit, you can turn that off, right?
Hmm.
But like it's still very like linear in like where I can go and like what I can do in terms of objectives. But Resident Evil's like all over the place. It's like I pick up a memo. It's about a guy talking about like for example, the Polaroid. You find the dog whistle, you get the Polaroid, and he's like, yeah, like there's this collar attached to the dog. If you like blow the whistle here, you can get it because you know that bastard did this thing again. Like all this extra exposition about how fucked up this mansion is, how there's no sense of management there and everything. Like it's just a really shitty work situation
Yeah.
for everybody. So only by looking at the Polaroid attached to the dog whistle do you know that you can go to that area and use the dog whistle to like have the dog come. When you kill the dog, you then get the emblem that you have to turn around out of the collar to get the key to use in the room that you just talked about a few minutes ago. Like
Hmm.
a lot of this is very like, oh, like I need to check this out. I need to do a lot of reading, and games don't do this anymore. It's very much like I'm going to tell you what to do, and Resident Evil's like, no, I'm going to let you discover what to do. And that's
Well,
a big departure from what a lot of games are now.
and what I think is really interesting is that because you need to get that key to progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting that Resident Evil tries its best to train you to pay attention to stuff like that, because
Mm-hmm.
later on there are optional things that you can do or get that you will only know about if you happen to read a memo and pay
Mm-hmm.
attention and remember it. Um, so
I
I
had a notebook when I played this game for the first time.
yes.
I like wrote everything down. I was like dog whistle, balcony, key, armor, three doors, upper floor, like all of that, you know? Like
Right. I mean, if you do that, I think this game will get easier. So you had the right idea.
I also think it feels very rewarding. And not in the I have an achievement sense, it's I figured this out on my own. Like I
Right.
was clever. I outsmarted this game kind of thing, you know? Like it feels very good solving these kinds of puzzles and systematically like going through and completing sections of the mansion.
Yes. Yes, it does. Um, and speaking of the mansion, uh, the I just wanted to talk about like the environment and the design and care that went into the mansion. Especially in this remake, in this remaster,
Hmm.
where the amount of detail that they poured into the game is just breathtaking. And I know we talked about how this game is really pretty, um, but I think it really bears talking about because this is so definitely one of the influences for this game is The Shining. And one of the things that makes The Shining so disorienting is like the little subtle ways in which the construction of the hotel doesn't make sense. And I think that is a major influence on the design of the Spencer Mansion. Because like literally every hallway and every
Hmm.
room feels distinct and also and is beautiful on its own, and each area is very memorable. Like heck, even the coat closet is memorable.
Hmm.
Um, and like I can just say the coat closet, and people who have played this game will know what I'm talking about.
Itchy tasty, baby.
um, and so it's all very distinct, all very memorable, which is really important in this game that basically progresses room by room. But on top of that, it adds to this disorientating, this disorienting feeling that pervades the game, especially in the early levels, where that house doesn't make sense. Like, the decor is totally different. A lot of like the furnishings or room placements are just bizarre.
There's actually an in-lore explanation for that.
Yeah. Well, and also the doors, each door is different. And I love that. I love that touch because it's not something that I think a lot of people immediately pick up on, but it's one of those things that your brain does. Like, you're just picking up, you're subtly picking up all of these things that are just slightly jarring with each other. And I think that that's a really cool and subtle way to have players slowly lose their footing, you know?
I felt like the different doors were really great landmarks, though. Like, I was like, oh, that's the door I need to go into that has this one room, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for me, like, with the environments, it was actually, like, looking at the environments and getting the text. Like, this wall is full of paintings. All of the faces have been, like, painted out. That kind of thing, you know? Like, or one of the first rooms you go into, there's a zombie actually sitting or laying in a corner in the room that becomes the crow room later on. When you come back through it, the zombie's gone. Like, things like that in regards to environmental storytelling, these like subtle changes or small observations you make, I think really give the mansion its own character, like within the series.
Yeah. And also I know we talked a little bit I talked a little bit about it with like the sound of the clock ticking. But the sound design in this game is amazing. Like you were just mentioning the crows. You walk back into that room to find that the zombie's gone, but before you get to that like angle that shows you that the zombie's gone, you're walking through the upper level and you can't see what's down there, and you start hearing like this weird zombie-like noise, and it makes you not want to go down those stairs, but you have to. And so you head down the stairs and you see that the crows are there, but the crows are trying to imitate the growls of a zombie. And it's just such a good touch. I loved it.
Yeah, like, just everything about Resident Evil Remake just makes it, I think, in my opinion, one of the best remasters of all time. Like, it's so good for, like, a remake, just specifically that, in terms of, like, how they elevated the atmospheres, the music, game mechanics, added this accessibility function with the PS4 version, you know, like, it's a really great game, and if you love survival horror, like, really consider giving it a shot, because this is really where it began.
Yeah, and it like you were kind of saying earlier, you can see this game's influence all across the entire genre, and also beyond, like, limited inventory space in an action-ish game, even if like it's not a huge action game, like, that's a game changer. Like, that has been huge in games going forward. Hiding loading screens behind doors, like, that's something that, you know, Metroid Prime did that. Like, it's something that has become like a staple that we don't really notice anymore because loading times have generally gotten pretty good. But like, for a long time, that's where this came from. Gosh, I'm just, the general layout of this game is great. And I think that the actual mechanics and design of the enemies is really good too. Like, we haven't really talked a whole lot about that. But it's very
I'll just say this, the chimeras, those are really f***ing disgusting.
Yes.
Those are really gross. So when you see those, if you're gonna play it for the first time, just be ready for it. Just think Jeff Goldblum's The Fly, and you'll be good.
Also, the zombies are actually scary in this
Yes.
one. Like, eventually you figure out a way, to deal with them, run around them, and you conquer that unnerving feeling, but it takes a while.
Because just the way they've designed the zombies to give them all like their unique model and character, like no zombie looks the same. And I really like that. Like you can tell like if a zombie has just been like living, or if they were someone who was living or working in like a certain part of the house, or like even if they were in the mansion, like within like the mansion's lab,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that adds like a lot of context to this character design as well. Or just like when I think about monstrous designs, I think of the Tyrant and how like this was made by someone, and how this thing encapsulates someone's idea of like a perfect life form, and how like monstrous it is in terms of like it has no lips, but it still has fully rendered toenails, like that kind of thing, like just the deliberate character design behind this. And even like the Neptunes, if you're afraid of water, then you'll love that sequence with the sharks. Or again, like even crows, if you're afraid of birds, like this, like that, like you mentioned, that low guttural like noise they make when you hear them for the first time. Just all of it really lends itself to this environment they create as you just explore this mansion and begin to uncover its secrets and like everything that was going on there.
Yeah. I was fascinated to learn that this game had a Nintendo DS port.
Okay, that's Deadly Silence?
Was it called Deadly Silence?
Let me check. Yep, Resident Evil Deadly Silence, and that had different puzzles, actually. Completely different puzzles.
Really?
Yep, there's one where you have to play Five Finger Fillet. There's another one where you have to blow into the mic of your DS to save Richard. And that I failed. I was like on a plane, I was doing that like desperately with my mouth pressed against the DS as I was like flying out somewhere. Yeah. And then there's also one where you have to like move this record on a gramophone at the right pace to like basically summon Yawn. Like it's like that has completely different puzzles. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it very much though. But
yeah, I'm sure the controls were a mess.
I don't even think it was the controller. I just think that I was like not into it because it's not in my mind what Resident Evil 1 was, if you know what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, like it's gonna be a portable version of Remake, and it just wasn't that, so I was like, huh.
Oh.
Okay. I also think it had the like Resident Evil 1 voice acting, like the really bad voice acting.
The voice acting nominated for the Guinness Book of World Records worst dialogue in gaming history.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's actually like that voice acting, and that was very jarring because if you look at the art for Deadly Silence, the promotional materials, it's all stuff that was for Remake.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, awesome, nice. And then you get there and it's like, whoa, what a monster. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. I see. I understand now.
Do you have any thoughts about the cut content for this game?
What do you mean for cut content for Resident Evil Remake?
So originally there were going to be 2 more members of the Stars team.
Yeah, there were. I don't remember their names exactly, but I know that one of them was an African American character.
Yeah, so there was a medic named Dewey, and then there was going to be a giant like cyborg character. I don't remember which of them was the African American.
I don't think it was the cyborg, because I know that he was based off of Eddie Murphy, actually, the African American character.
Okay, well then that was probably the medic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I guess, like, that's how I feel about that. Like, Well, I mean, I have Rebecca, and I have Sheva, and I have Josh Stone, and I have all these other characters, so I feel like nothing was lost by cutting those characters out of the game.
So there are some rumors going around that Capcom might remake Resident Evil,
Hmm.
especially now that Remake 2 has gone so well. Um, I would love if there was like a bit of like a side story where they resurrected these two cut characters and have like they're having their own parallel adventure going on around the Spencer Mansion.
I think that'd be fun.
It'd be stupid, but I would love
I
it.
mean, I don't think they're gonna. This is just my personal speculation. I don't know shit. Um, for the record, I think that they will end up remaking Outbreak before they'll end up remaking Resident Evil 1 again.
And which one was Outbreak?
Outbreak is also canon to the series. It is the multiplayer game that came out for PS2, Outbreak File 1 and Outbreak File 2.
It's part of the Resident Evil series?
It's canon, yeah.
I
It's like
have
actual
never
canon.
heard of this.
Yeah, so it's a multiplayer game, and you can pick from a variety of like I think 6 or 7 different characters. Each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses and skills, and you have to level them up. And there was no voice communication at the time, so you actually had to use like prompts to be like, "Hey, come here. Let's go. Hurry up." Like and everything, like to like tell people what to do. And the more you get attacked, the more infected you would become, and eventually you would become completely infected if you couldn't find like an antivirus after getting infected. To a point in which you would no longer have control of your character and maybe kill your friends. Like it's actually really interesting, and I think it could really thrive now because this game was way too ahead of its time when it came out. Like way too ahead of its time.
Rip.
Yep. It's incredible. People who have played Outbreak love Outbreak, and I think again Outbreak would be a great addition to the Resident Evil franchise again if they would like to reintroduce it at some point. People would have a lot of fun with it.
Do you think that they're willing to do a game like that after Operation Raccoon City?
Operation Raccoon City was just okay. That's a completely different. Oh God. Okay, Operation Raccoon City. I mean, I think the angle is interesting, but Capcom went really wild with it, in which they were like, "The year is 1998. We're going to give someone face camo." Or like I mean like those characters could have been genuinely cool. They're all kind of like weird and zany, like US I think it's the USBC. There are two branches of Umbrella, white and red Umbrella, and I could be confusing the USBC for like a different branch of Umbrella because Carlos Oliveira was with a branch of Umbrella as well, but he was also a PMC. See, there's a lot of Resident Evil lore that you have to kind of dissect to get to this place.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the premise of it being like, yeah, it's an alternate future and you can like kill Leon and everything. Like, ooh, don't you want to do that? Because you're so tired of seeing his face everywhere.
No, I want
like,
to smooch Leon.
Yeah, like let me kiss him. But like I think it's an interesting concept. A shame the gameplay was just really bad. Like it was just not good. If you don't have friends to play that game with, you're never gonna get past the first level because Birkin will just obliterate you. Like, sorry.
Fun.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not a good game. Umbrella Chronic. It's Operation Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps are like the two big stains on the franchise, and we just kind of pretend they don't exist. I feel like Capcom, if they literally just made Outbreak with the same kind of style that they did with like the Resident Evil 2 remake, it could be amazing. Just like over the shoulder, third person, like survival horror shooter, like it could really be great. But balancing this out might prove difficult. Back then it was pretty balanced. And some runs were just really difficult. Like, I think there was a character who plays like a really old man, so he couldn't run very fast ever, but I think he had like a lot of health, and that was kind of like the benefit to playing him. And I feel like if they added these attributes to these characters and like just let you like do this with like 8 other people online without voice comms, it could be really fun.
Okay. Yeah.
Just check out Outbreak and then tell me what you think about it, because the fact that you have like Operation Raccoon City in your mind, it's like that is something that like you cannot remove until you actually like look at Outbreak, because I know exactly what you're thinking right now. It's like,
Okay.
that didn't really work, so maybe, like, yeah. But I think it could be good now.
Okay. So, Resident Evil is a best game, period. Yes, no, final thoughts?
Yes, and I will say this because it had inspired an entire genre of video games. It's kind of like the Resident Evil 4 argument where it's like, it's not my favorite Resident Evil game, but it is a video game that is so immensely important to the industry that I do believe it is one of the best games ever.
Yeah, I mean, like, I definitely feel like I have a better grasp on video game history now that I've played through, like, these earlier Resident Evils.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ideas that got carried over into everything else.
Mm-hmm. It's just such an influential game. Series, just in general.
Yeah, no kidding. I am really sad that apparently the Game Boy Color version of this game never got out.
No, see, okay, you say that, but then you never played Resident Evil Gaiden, and I did.
Oh,
And you
gosh.
never want to experience that.
It looked really pretty, though. On a Game Boy Color, the original Resident Evil.
You know what?
For a Game Boy
Yes.
Color game.
Yeah, it did look good. I'll give you that. I'm gonna pull up Resident Evil Gaiden for you.
Oh no.
Oh yes. Oh yes. This game is not canon, by the way. It was canon at one point, but it's no longer canon. You played as Leon on a cruise ship, and you were with Barry trying to find survivors, and the gameplay is just miserable, and it's difficult, and it's no fun. But yeah, the fact that it looked really close to the one for the Game Boy, it's like, you know what? I could go without that. I guess I have Deadly Silence, you know?
I know. Okay, so your final argument is that Resident Evil is just so influential it can't not be.
That, and I think it's just like overall like a really fantastic game that has held up over the years and has warranted like being remastered and remade and ported to so many different systems that if it wasn't this good, it wouldn't have received that treatment. I just think it's, again, like so influential and like such a good game that it really does, or it is like one of the best games ever.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with you completely. Like, the game is just it's special. I'm kind of sad that the gameplay has departed so much from what it is in the first Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like the lack of like decent puzzles that are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember playing Resident Evil 4 and I was just like going through and I'd get to a puzzle and it's like, oh, I need to put a thing in this hole. Well, I only have the one thing that I picked up like 5 minutes ago, so I'm gonna put that in this hole. Solve the puzzle.
I'll be honest, the puzzles had actually gotten easier before Resident Evil 4 with Resident Evil 0. I think Code Veronica was the last one where puzzles were actually very difficult.
Yeah, see, I have only played... I played a little bit of 2, and I played a little bit of Code Veronica, and then I played 4. So I missed everything up to 4, pretty much. And 4 was my first Resident Evil game, so I had to like go back and play these.
Mm-hmm.
So... Yeah, I wish there were better puzzles in newer Resident Evil games.
Yeah, I miss using my brain. Because it feels very rewarding when you figure out those puzzles, like having to go through like certain areas and write stuff down and then be like, ah, yes, I know exactly what to do here. You know, like it feels good.
Yes, it does feel good. It instead of like artificially creating those endorphins, you're getting them naturally, all natural endorphins.
Mm-hmm. And I'm exercising my brain.
It's like Brain Age with zombies.
Wow, that'd be a really good game, actually. Pitch it to Nintendo, baby.
I would if I could. They're not returning my calls.
Damn.
Okay. Well, Resident Evil is a best game, period. You heard it here first. Where can people find you?
People can find me at @JusticeKazi_ on Twitter. You can also find my work on RPG site, Nova Crystallis, and Rely on Horror, as I am both a translator and reviewer for these websites.
That was really professional.
It's all I have, okay?
And do you have any like final words? It doesn't have to be about Resident Evil. It can just be in general.
I'm thinking, nothing's coming to mind. No, just, you know what? Go play Resident Evil Remake. Have a time with it. It's one of the games I wish that I could erase from my memory to experience again, so if you've never played this game again, give it a shot and see how you feel about it.
And would you recommend playing without a guide?
Yes. But don't be afraid of using a guide either. If for some reason you're feeling overwhelmed and anxious, use the guide. Seriously, no one's gonna think any less of you. I won't. I used the guide when I was a kid. I couldn't figure shit out. I was a dumb baby. So you know what? Like, go at it without a guide at first, and if you feel like you're stuck, use a guide. It won't detract from your experience.
Okay. And on that note, you can find this podcast over on SoundCloud, Libsyn. We have a Twitter @BestGames, period. We also have a Patreon. So if you enjoyed listening to this show, please head over to patreon.com/bestgames, period, and you can support us. Even if you can just toss us $1 a month, that really helps. Helps us keep the lights on, and we're getting so close to our breaking even for hosting costs, which would be amazing for the first time ever. So again, that's patreon.com/bestgame, period. If you become one of our patrons, you get access to a bunch of exclusive episodes and early access to things like this podcast or other things that we do. And on that note, you can also find us over on community.extra-life.org. And if you haven't heard of Extra Life before, it's a fantastic charity. It's part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, and it helps sick and injured kids all across the United States and Canada. And you can learn more over at extra-life.org. And when you visit, you can get your questions answered, and if you sign up, you can actually choose a Children's Miracle Network hospital in the United States and Canada, and when you raise money, all of the money you raise goes directly to that hospital to help sick and injured kids. Really great charity, and you raise money by playing games, so chances are, if you've listened all the way through this podcast, you are someone who likes playing games, and you could play games and also help kids at the same time, so consider that in your brain pan. Next week, Naomi should be back, but a huge thank you to Kazuma Hashimoto. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I hope you come back again.
Definitely. It's always really nice being on. I love your podcast, so it's always a treat just hanging out and talking about video games with you. And if you ever need anybody to talk about the Yeehaw with, you know who to talk to.
The Yeehaw?
Yeehaw. Yeah, the Yeehaw, the cowboy game, baby.
Any cowboy game?
Oh, no, I mean, like, there are only really 2, maybe 3 out there if you want to count Red Dead Revolver, but yeah, you know what? I'm down.
There's Call of Juarez Gunslinger. Or
oh yeah, Call of Juarez. That does exist.
Or the best game ever, Call of Juarez Cartel.
I've actually never played that. Good.
It's very racist.
Okay, you know what? We'll just stick with the Red Dead. Okay.
Anyway, Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be back next week. See you on the flippity dippity.